I canceled the wedding I planned, donated the cake, and watched the bride realize I was the richest woman in the room. I'm 65, and this is the story of how a plain cardigan and a careless insult turned a fairy tale into a lesson. My name is Helena Ward, though most people just call me Lena. I am a grandmother of 3, a widow of 9 years, and the quiet sponsor behind the kind of wedding people post about for months. I chose the string quartet, the peonies, the champagne coupe glasses, the place cards with raised gold lettering that felt like silk under your fingertips. I booked the venue a year in advance, negotiated the corkage, and handpicked the maitre d' because he remembered my late husband and always ironed the linen one last time before guests took their seats. I did everything except one thing. In the rush of spreadsheets and seating charts and vendor calls, I forgot to buy myself a dress. It sounds ridiculous now. I had a wardrobe full of sensible things: soft blouses for errands, one good coat for winter funerals, a cardigan that had survived more holidays than I care to count, but the thought of a dress for my son's wedding kept getting nudged to tomorrow. I meant to go. Every day, I truly meant to go. And then I'd wake up, realize the florist needed a revised stem count, and the band needed a bigger stage riser, and the officiant wanted to confirm the mic setup. And my dress would slide to the bottom of the list like a note you move to the side of your desk and forget exists. On the morning of the wedding, I stared at the open closet and laughed at myself. Not a mean laugh. Just the quiet one you make when you know you've done something silly. Clothes aren't the main thing, I told my reflection. Family is. I chose my nicest dark trousers, a cream blouse that sat right on my shoulders, and the gray-blue cardigan my husband had once said made my eyes look like the ocean after a storm. I pinned on his old tie clip, not because it matched anything, but because it was him. The venue rose out of the hillside like a white ship, high windows, a terrace overlooking the river, wisteria trained along balustrades. Cars glittered in the parking lot like beetles, sleek black sedans, a vintage Porsche that I knew belonged to the bride's brother, and a limousine too long for that narrow drive. The decorations, my decorations, were already perfect by the time I arrived. The florist had woven peonies and ranunculus into clouds along the arch. Candles waited like tiny moons in crystal cups, the string quartet tuned with slow, serious motions. I found my son in a side room with his best man. He looked handsome in the suit we'd tailored twice, tall, a bit too pale, eyes bright like when he dressed for his first school play, and kept asking if the tie was straight. "How do I look?" he asked, and I, who had seen his first laugh and his first fever and the way he held a kitten as if it were glass, told him the truth. Like a man ready to begin. He kissed my cheek, grateful, and rushed. We talked about nothing: boutonnieres, weather, the rhythm of the ceremony. He didn't notice the cardigan, or if he did, he didn't care. That is the thing about sons who know where they come from. They know caring looks many ways. When I stepped into the vestibule, I ran into her. Eliza was a diamond of a girl, sharp, bright, expensive to cut. She belonged to a family that lived in houses with old names, people who collected original art and had summer places, people whose photographs looked like magazine spreads, too white a smile, too perfect a sunset behind the glass of a flute. They weren't unkind, they were simply trained to see the world as rooms they had already been invited into. She looked at me, looked at my cardigan, looked at the polished floor where my old flats made their quiet scuffs. Her eyes moved like a jeweler's loupe. "You're joking," she said, voice low. "I'm sorry." I asked. "You can't be serious, Helena." "Not like that." The last 2 words dropped like pins on tile. "I forgot," I said, because it was the truth. "I've been doing everything else. I ran out of time." "But clothes aren't the main thing," she said, mimicking my tone, and the smile she wore was not a smile at all. "Do you know who will be here today? My father's board. The Bergstroms. The Langs. People from the foundation. Photographers. Press, even. And you show up looking like that?" I felt the floor shift slightly beneath my feet. The vestibule magnified sounds, the distant tuning of the strings, the clink of glassware, the whisper of dresses moving like water. "The main thing," I said, gently, so gently it barely rose above the air, "is that the whole family is here. That you love my son and that he loves you. That we are together. Clothes don't. She laughed. It was small, sharp, gone quickly. Of course you don't understand. You wouldn't. I warned Daniel this would happen. He didn't listen. Well, I'm done. I won't have my wedding ruined by this. Someone passed behind us, her brother, the man with the vintage Porsche, cutting an impressive figure in his tuxedo. She snapped her fingers as if calling a waiter. Evan. He turned. Yeah, kindly escort Helena out. She's a poor outcast who doesn't know how to behave. I don't want her in any photos. Not today. For a second, I thought I had misheard. The world can do that to you at 65, sounds slip and slide, meanings double. But I had not misheard. The word poor landed on my chest as if someone had pressed a coin there, cool and mean. Outcast followed like a door closing. I'm the groom's mother, I said, not to argue, just to state something the room seemed to be forgetting. Eliza lifted her chin. And I'm the woman he's marrying, the one whose family is paying for a wedding that will be in magazines. Evan. Her brother moved toward me, palms out in that pacifying way men adopt when they are about to do something unforgivable and want you to help them pretend it isn't. Let me walk you out, ma'am, he said. I almost sat down. The air thinned. I could hear my pulse in my ears like quick feet in a hallway. For a second, heat rushed up the back of my neck and the lights swam. I pressed 2 fingers to the tie clip. Not here, I told myself inside my skull, the way a mother tells herself not to cry until the door is closed. Not here. Not now. I took a breath and felt the ground return. I smiled the way you do when you don't wish to frighten anyone, and I allowed the brother to escort me to the steps outside. Sorry, he mumbled when we reached the shade. I think she's just nervous. Nerves tell the truth, I said. But so do receipts. He frowned, not understanding, already eager to be back inside, because music and bright light were happening there, and standing next to a gray-blue cardigan on the side steps did not fit his picture of his day. When he left me, I stood by the wisteria and watched the river for a count of 30. Long enough to hear a gull, long enough to feel the first real coolness of afternoon and the certainty that had risen in me like a tide. My hands were very steady. It surprised me. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. There is a particular quiet you learn when you build things from scratch. I was not born with money. I met it the way one meets a language they were never taught, by listening until the shape of it becomes yours. I bought our first house on a short sale. I opened a little laundry business in a neighborhood most people avoided, then I opened 3 more. Then I sold all 4 to a regional chain at a number so large I didn't say it out loud for a week. I bought 2 small apartment buildings, then 3. I never posted any of it. I drove an old car. I wore cardigans because they last. Wealth, to me, was quiet. It was a promise I made to myself after burying a husband who taught high school for 33 years and left me the one thing money can't buy, a clean ledger of love. The wedding was mine, every invoice, every deposit, every balance due on my account's calendar. When you plan something this large, you put it all in one place and you give yourself multiple levers to pull if something goes wrong. I had 3, money, contracts, and time. I pressed the first lever. Hello, Martin, I said when the maitre d' answered. It's Helena. We have a problem. Mrs. Ward. His voice warmed. He was a man who did not forget who wrote the checks. What do you need? The event is cancelled. Silence. Are you sure? Guests have arrived. The kitchen. I'm aware. I prefer to do this gracefully. We'll settle for the work completed and tip the staff generously, but the service stops. No plating. No champagne pour. He hesitated. The bride's family did not sign your contract. I kept my voice kind. I liked Martin. I did. Check the clause under cause for immediate termination. It covers removal of sponsor or sponsor's immediate family from the event. Someone just asked the groom's mother to leave. That's removal. I'm invoking the clause. A breath on the line. Papers rustling. The faint crackle of overhead music. I see it, he said finally. I've never seen it used. Few people have reason, I told him. Today I do. I pressed the second lever. The bandleader answered with laughter in the background. "We're warming up," he said. "You can warm down," I said softly. "Contract cancelled. I'll pay you your base for showing up. Please pack and go." But our second set. There won't be one. I called the decor company. I called the lighting techs. I called the host with the warm baritone who had practiced saying the bride's middle name 3 times to get the cadence right. I called the string quartet. I called the photographer and released them with my blessing, telling them the lighting on the terrace would be perfect 2 hours from now if they wanted to find another gig down the road. Most of them argued at first, because people argue with impossible truth. Then they heard my voice and the word signed, and the shape of the day changed for them. Finally, I called the bakery. "Eleanor," I said, "do you have a driver near the ridge?" "We do," she said. "Is everything all right?" "All is well," I said, "but I'd like the cake to be delivered elsewhere. I'm texting you an address for a shelter and day center on 3rd. It's their soup night. Tell the staff to slice small. It's a deep buttercream. I'll cover an extra tip for your driver." There was a pause, and then Eleanor's voice turned that particular soft that women use when they recognize a crossroads speaking to them. "It will be there within the hour." I sat on the stone step while the sun climbed higher and watched the machinery of a large event slow, then still. The band cases rolled back toward the freight elevator. The lighting techs wound cable into black rings. The quartet stood together in their neat black suits, murmuring. Instruments snapped into velvet beds. The host, his name was Gary, and he smelled faintly of cinnamon gum, came out to stand near me for a moment as if to say goodbye. He didn't ask questions. He simply gave me a nod like men give each other after a difficult job done right. Upstairs, people moved like fish in a disturbed pond, beautiful, startled, not yet understanding. Voices rose. The maitre d' stepped out to lock the terrace bar with a discreet click. It was, if you can believe it, profoundly peaceful. I did not cry. Instead, I looked down at the tie clip on my cardigan and said, out loud, "The way you talk to the dead when you need their spine, they thought clothes made the woman." Behind me, a door swung open. Eliza stepped outside with 2 bridesmaids trailing like petals. "Where is the quartet?" she demanded, then saw me and gave a brittle smile. "Oh, you're still here." "I am," I said. "The bar is closed," she snapped. "Why is the bar closed? Why are the lights going down in the hall? Where are the uplights?" She looked over her shoulder. "Evan, find Martin. And tell him my father will handle this bill. He should come to me." "Your father can't," I said. "He didn't sign it." "What?" Her head flicked back to me, a hawk suddenly noticing a mouse that is not a mouse at all. "What are you talking about?" "I signed it," I said, "and it is a wonder how gentle your voice can be when you have all the facts. All of it. The venue. The band. The decor. The host. The photographs. The transportation. The cake." She blinked. The words arranged themselves in front of her like furniture in a room she had once claimed was hers. "That's impossible. We, my family, own a great deal," I said. "But you did not own this day." "I did. And since I have been asked to leave, the day goes with me." She went very still. "You can't be serious." "Quite," I said. "And as for the cake, it's already on its way to people who won't mind that I wore a cardigan when I send it." "What have you done?" The last word lifted at the end the way it does when the person speaking suspects the answer and hates it. "What all mothers do when their children are in danger," I said. "I pulled them away from the fire." She stared at me for a heartbeat, then 2, then turned on her heel and stalked back into the cool interior like a general calling in cavalry. I let her go. The river moved with its ancient indifference, the wisteria nodded, and, somewhere, a gull scolded the water, because that is what gulls do. I checked my watch. In 12 minutes, the guests would walk through the doors, and in 12 minutes, there would be nothing to greet them but clean tables and flowers that looked suddenly like a vigil. I stood, smoothed my cardigan, and went to find my son. Part 2 of 3, The Silence Inside the Ballroom. A wedding without sound is a strange creature. The hum you expect, the tuning of strings, the soft feedback pop of a microphone, the clink of glass, and the rustle of dresses was gone. In its place, the slide of chair legs over parquet, the whisper of confused voices attempting to be polite, the echo of footsteps amplified by expectation. When Daniel saw me, his face lightened with relief. Relief first, then the question. The way Joy steps forward and doubt puts a hand on its shoulder. Mom, he said, what's happening? The lights, why is everything? You and I are going to step outside, I said softly, and we are going to take a walk to the far end of the terrace where we can't hear anyone else, and I am going to tell you something, and then you are going to decide what kind of man you are. He followed. The terrace stones still held the morning's cool. Downriver, a tugboat sounded a low horn, and I felt the vibration in the soles of my feet. I paid for this day, I said when we were alone. Every piece. Quietly. Not because I wanted to be seen, but because I wanted you to feel held. He swallowed, eyes on my face, slightly shocked, not by the money so much as the secret. Why didn't you tell me? Because pride is a poor shepherd, I said. And I didn't want it leading you. I wanted love to lead you. He looked out at the river, and I watched my son do a hard thing, adjust an identity he had been polishing for a year. What happened? He asked at last. I forgot to buy a dress, I said. It's difficult to justify that, but it's true. I wore a cardigan. Your fiancé called me a poor outcast and asked her brother to remove me. He closed his eyes. Not for long. Just long enough to pull breath up from the bottom of himself. She said that. She did. He opened his eyes again, and they were not a boy's eyes. Then what are we doing here? That, I said, is for you to decide. He stood in the wind a moment longer, then straightened his shoulders. In his profile I saw his father, the set of the job before he told a student the truth they needed and not the comfort they wanted, the way he tilted his head when he had chosen a road. We're not doing this, he said. Not like this. We walked back into the ballroom together. Guests had clustered into polite confusion. The bride's family congregated near the terrace doors, a collection of navy and gold and pearls conferring in low, tight voices. Eliza stood at the center like a fountain statue, veil spilling, eyes trained on the manager as if sheer force would turn her demand into reality. When Daniel approached, a murmur ran through the room. People moved aside as if choreographed. He stopped before her and waited until she looked at him. She looked at me first. Then him. Darling, she said, smile paper thin, there's been a misunderstanding with the staff and some contracts, but it's being resolved. My father will. My mother organized and paid for this wedding, Daniel said, voice even, warm with the tremor of a man refusing to be unkind. You asked her to leave. She's not dressed appropriately, Eliza said, as if reading a verdict for a minor offense. He was quiet a full beat. Clothes are not the main thing. Her expression flickered. You're overreacting. You called my mother a poor outcast. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The truth rose without help. You had your brother remove her. Someone sucked in a breath nearby, the audible shock of a guest who liked their drama to happen on shows, not in front of their canopy. Eliza's brother shifted, posture collapsing just enough to signal a man who wished this moment would pass through him like a ghost. Eliza's chin went up. People are watching, she hissed through a smile. They will see what we are, Daniel said, and I watched my son become entirely himself. We won't pretend. The bride's father stepped forward, a man used to negotiating oilier waters than these. Young man, he began, you're upsetting my daughter on her wedding day. Let me handle the vendor situation. This kind of thing is delicate. It's simple, Daniel said. We're not having a wedding that requires my mother to be invisible. For a moment, nothing moved. Then something shifted, not in the room, in Eliza. You could see it. A tilt, a recalibration, a clock discovering it had been keeping time to the wrong church bell. What do you mean, your mother paid? She asked, but it sounded different now. Not offense, surprise. I mean, he said, she paid. I thought, she stopped herself and the rest of the room filled the blank. I thought we were the wealthy ones. I thought generosity looked like us. It doesn't matter who paid, her mother interjected quickly, hand on her daughter's arm. We can reschedule with a fresh vendor team. Something new. Something better suited. Her eyes, when they cut to my cardigan, said the word she wouldn't. It does matter, Daniel said, kindness going from his voice like a light at dusk. Because money gives you choices, and my mother chose us. She chose to build something beautiful. She chose to trust that love mattered more than a dress. He looked at Eliza. You chose a dress. Color rose under the bride's makeup, real color, not the painted kind. For a second, Eliza seemed very young in a way that made my heart twist. Sometimes we are handed the script too early and told to perform without reading it. Sometimes we learn the lines so well we forget to ask if they are true. Daniel, she whispered, I'm sorry. She looked at me then, and there was a person at last behind the face. I said something cruel. You did, I said. We can fix this. We're going to fix it, I said. But not in this room. Guests shifted again as if a tide had turned and moved the whole shoreline a little. Someone in the back whispered, is it cancelled? And the word sailed through people like a small, bright fish. It is, I said, because clarity is a mercy. There are many ways to end a wedding. We chose the one that broke nothing further. Martin and his staff moved gently among the guests with trays of water, explaining that there had been a sudden change of plans and that the couple would reach out. People left in pairs, murmuring, adjusting shawls and schedules. The decor crew lifted flowers down as if they were sleeping children. The band, already packed, slipped away like ghosts who had never been there. When the room had thinned to family, we stood in a smaller circle. Silence pressed close. My son took my hand. Eliza's father looked at me and minced his words the way powerful men do when they discover power they didn't count has been sitting quietly in the third row all along. Helena, he began, I owe you an apology and a thank you. Your generosity was for them, I said, and nodded toward Daniel. Not for you. He bowed his head. Genuine. A man caught by his own daughter's reflection and seeing himself properly for the first time in months. Fair enough. Eliza stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was small and clear, like the first note of a beginner's violin that finally finds the pitch. I lost my way, she said. I thought the day was a mirror. I forgot it was a vow. I didn't make it easy. Only easy things stay shallow. What do you value when no one is taking pictures? I asked. Our table, she said. Who sits at it? Who stays? Who is safe there? Good, I said. Then listen. We moved to a side room. Just us, the four of us at a round table meant for cake tastings. The room smelled faintly of vanilla and roses. I laid it out in plain words, the way a mother sets medicine by a glass of water and waits until the child swallows. I can afford extravagance, I said. I can afford 5 more weddings like the one I canceled. But money has never been the point of mine. I wanted you to have a beginning that felt as careful as I tried to be when I raised him. Today showed me I mistook shine for substance. That's my fault. It will not happen again. So you have a choice. You can drown in embarrassment and spend the next year managing a narrative for people who will forget it in a week, or you can look at what happened, take the lesson, and choose each other differently. If you choose the lesson, I went on, I'll use the remainder of what I set aside to build a foundation for your life, an ordinary, good one, a down payment on a small house you can maintain without being owned by it, an emergency fund you don't post online, a few trips that look like yourselves, not anyone else. And a wedding, if you still want one, where the loudest thing is the sea. No one spoke. The room's small clock ticked so gently I almost missed it. Eliza broke the quiet. The sea? The seaside, I said. Where vows sound like they're meant to. Daniel turned toward her. I did not watch his face. This is a sacred privacy, the moment a man measures not his love, which is obvious, but his respect. It was there. He found it. Yes or no, he asked softly. Do we want us, or do we want pictures of us? She closed her eyes, and the diamond on her hand threw a point of light onto the underside of the table like a small star on a plain world. When she opened them, she nodded. Us, she said. I want us. Then we go home, I said, and we start again. Before we left, I drove to 3rd Street. The shelter was already busy, their soup night, Eleanor had said. A line of men and women and 2 small boys in yellow rain boots, sunny, but they wore them like armor, wound along the fence. From my car, I dipped quietly to the side door where staff received donations. The volunteer who took the cake did not know its story. He only knew kindness when he saw it. It's beautiful, he said, opening the box to a cathedral of buttercream, White-on-white filigree that would have been a showpiece in the ballroom. People are going to love this. Tell them it's for everyone, I said. Even those who don't want pictures. He smiled. We always do. Part 3 of 3, The Wedding by the Sea. Our second wedding was a different size of miracle. There were 13 of us if you counted the goals, which I did because the goals were nosy and voiced their opinions. We chose the beach at the end of the public path where wild roses grew and the grass bowed in the wind. The sound there made talking unnecessary until it mattered. Shush of waves on sand, the low hush like a mother's hand smoothing a child's hair, the quiet throttle of a small boat turning at the inlet. We didn't send invitations. We called people, the ones who had seen us in our ordinary lives, Daniel's best friend from the house painting summer, my sister who cried out loud at good news, Eliza's grandmother who still canned peaches each July. Martin came in his off hours and set a long table of planks he borrowed from a cousin's dock. The tablecloth was the wind. The centerpiece was a bowl of lemons and a small spray of rosemary I snipped that morning from my own garden. Shoes were optional. No one wore a watch. Eliza came down the path in a dress that would have lost a fight with the ballroom. Linen, bone-colored, the kind that breathes. No train. Her hair was her hair, not a crown. She carried nothing but her face. When she reached us, she took my hands. I'm sorry, she said again, and this time it didn't sound like a hinge to a request. It sounded like something finished so something else could begin. I accept, I said. I also reserve the right to tell this story someday when your children ask why their parents are so particular about kindness. She laughed through tears. Deal. Daniel watched her the way a man watches the rain begin after too long a heat. The officiant, a friend with a license and a voice that makes even dry words feel like bread, spoke as the wind climbed and dipped. Vows, he said, are just promises you say out loud in front of your people so you can be reminded when you forget. They promised what people have promised under trees and stars and cheap chandeliers since we learned to stand upright, to show up when it's unglamorous, to unclench first, to tell the truth even when it's unflattering. To sit together when fear tries to pull them into separate rooms, to pick the person over the picture. When it was my turn, I did not give a toast. I set a boundary and a blessing, because those are what mothers give when they love properly. Here's the boundary, I said, voice not needing a microphone because the sea had turned its head to listen. No one speaks of anyone's worth in the language of what they wear. Not at our table. Not on our phones. Not ever. If someone forgets, we remind them. If someone insists, we show them the gate. Here's the blessing, I went on. May your days be ordinary and good. May your home be small enough to know when someone is sad without asking. May your money be quiet and your generosity loud. May you always have people who will sit with you at a round table and tell you the truth. And may the worst thing that ever happens at your celebrations be a gull stealing bread. Laughter rippled. A gull, as if on cue, scolded us. The officiant pronounced them married with the sound of waves for witness. There was no grand music. Daniel kissed his wife, and it looked like two people stopping time because they could. We ate from platters that tasted like summer, the kind of meal that doesn't print well in magazines because it moves and drips and stains smiles with olive oil. Friends passed plates hand to hand. Little children threw sand, then smoothed it in contrition. Eliza's father surprised me by being very good at deshelling shrimp and very quiet at boasting. He looked at his daughter as if trying to memorize a different version of her than the one he'd helped build. Helena, he said when we stood together to watch the wind lift the edge of the tablecloth, I have been told all my life that wealth is how you are seen. He looked down at his bare feet on the cool sand. I'm starting to suspect it's how you see. Better late than never, I said, and because grace is a practice, not a performance, I added, you have a lovely daughter. She chose well, he said, and for once he meant Daniel, not a venue. When the sun leaned toward the edge of the world, we lit a small fire in a ring of stones. It wasn't photogenic. It smoked. It took time. People took turns kneeling to coax flame from damp sticks. When it finally caught, the light gilded faces and made us all look richer than we were. We passed around a tin pail of marshmallows because life is serious and also not. The goals approved. We stayed until the first star clicked on. The ocean moved and kept moving, indifferent to peonies and chairs and vendor lists, faithful to the work it knew. Weeks later, Eliza and I walked a quiet block together where the real estate signs were humble and the porches held plants in chipped pots. We stood in front of a narrow house with a deep porch and a stoop that would creak in winter. "This one," she said. "It's not grand. It won't require an army to live in it," I said. "It will require you." We walked through the rooms, the old hardwood, the sunlight puddling in corners, the small kitchen that would have to work hard to hold big gratitude. In the back, a square of yard waited for a grill and a basil plant, and the kind of dog that arranges itself beneath the table without asking. The price was what I had hoped. At closing, the agent slid a stack of papers across the desk. Daniel signed, Eliza signed, the way people sign when they understand the weight and gift of their names. When the pen reached me, I added my part, not with a flourish, simply with steadiness. The down payment moved from an account that had waited for exactly this to a place that would hold them. We did not tell anyone online. We told the basil when we planted it, and the basil told the air. It took time for the ballroom story to fade in town. People love a rumor that fits into an evening like a third glass of wine. But stories change when the people in them do. Eliza took a job she would have dismissed a year ago because the office lighting was bad. She brought casseroles to neighbors without taking a picture first. She took my cardigan one chilly evening and gave it back washed and folded like treasure. Daniel learned to fix the door that stuck in summer and the way to make coffee that did not punish the tongue. He remembered to kiss his wife when there were no witnesses. On Thursdays, we ate soup together and rarely spoke of cakes. Some nights I drive by the old venue. Wisteria still nods, and candles still imitate the moon. New couples stand on the terrace promising the old promises. I hope they keep them. On the anniversary of the seaside ceremony, we returned to the beach with other small things that deserved blessing: a baby shoe for the one on the way, a sprig of rosemary for meals worth remembering, a gray-blue cardigan, because some stories hold their shape. The wind lifted my hair. The gulls made their foolish commentary. Eliza slipped her hand into mine. "I am learning," she said, "how not to mistake the frame for the portrait." "You are," I said. "And your children will learn sooner, because you did." We stayed until the tide drew its neat line and erased our footprints. The sea does not keep records the way people do. It knows only the pull of the moon, in and out, the practice of return. On our way back up the path, I turned and looked once more, not for photographs, just to mark the place. The light lay along the water like silk. If you stood there, you could almost hear a quartet. Or maybe it was only the gulls. Either way, it was enough. By the time the bride realized the cake had been rerouted to the shelter and the quartet had packed their cases, my son had already decided whether he chose a wedding or a family. I found Daniel in the groom's room, tie-draped over a chair like a thought he hadn't finished. He was staring at the window, at his own reflection, at the life on the other side of the glass. For one breath, I was just his mother again, the one who still kept cough drops in a side pocket and remembered which cologne didn't give him a headache. "Walk with me," I said. We crossed the terrace stones together. The river carried a low shine, a moving sheet of light. When he finally asked, "What's wrong?" I told him without embroidery. I told him about the cardigan and the word outcast and the request to escort me out. I told him I had been foolish about a dress and very deliberate about everything else. I told him I had canceled what I paid for, every last piece, because love doesn't perform tricks for a seat in the front row. He listened the way he used to listen to bedtime stories. No blinking, hands still, the ending mattering more than breath. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long 10 seconds that felt like a century learning to walk. "Then there's no wedding here," he said. "There's you," I said. "What you do now will be the first real line in your vows, with witnesses or without." He nodded once. I remember the precise tilt of his chin, how it matched the angle he used to take when he tried to steady his bicycle and stay upright the first time without training wheels. The same boy, the same man, deciding to balance on what was true, not what was promised. We came back inside together. A ballroom without music is a cathedral surprised by quiet. The chandeliers hummed to themselves, unsure. Men in tuxedos tapped phones as if service could cure confusion. The florist's clouds of peonies had never looked more like weather. On the far side, the bride's family stood in a heavy cluster, pearl and navy and polite impatience. At the center, Eliza's veil floated like a small storm. I watched the exact moment she understood something had shifted. She turned to speak to a planner who was no longer there, reached for a flute of champagne that did not exist, and then looked down the room and saw us. The brightness of her expression faltered the way a candle gutters when a door opens. "Darling," she said to Daniel as we approached, arranging her features into composure, "there's an issue with the staff." "It's fine. Daddy's calling the manager. We'll fix it." "You asked my mother to leave," Daniel said. He didn't accuse. He stated. The room heard it like a bell. Eliza froze, smile caught as if on a pin. "We should talk privately." "Here is fine," Daniel said, gentle and unmovable as a closed gate. "Your mother came in. That outfit," Eliza said, the words careful, clipped, arranged for a court that cared about photographs. "It's your wedding day, Daniel. People are here." "The press." "Clothes are not the main thing," he said. "You told her she was a poor outcast and asked your brother to take her out." A small sound broke at the back, a guest who couldn't pretend it was a misunderstanding anymore. Eliza's brother, the Portia, tried to fade into mirrored paneling. Her father cleared his throat in the tone men use to bend reality. "Let's not make a scene," he said, palms out. "We can resolve the vendor hiccup. If there are fees, I'll cover them." "The contracts aren't yours," I said quietly. "They're mine." Eliza's head turned. Her veil shushed against embroidered lace. "What?" "I signed every check," I said. "The venue. The decor. The music. The host. The photographer. The cake." When I was escorted to the door, I chose to escort those things with me. A tide moves out in a room like that. You can feel it in the way shoulders drop, mouths open, and then close. Pearls rest against throats as if listening. "That can't be true," Eliza's mother said, but her eyes were already doing the math and finding unfamiliar numbers. Eliza stared at me as if I had just changed language mid-sentence. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because the gift was for you, not for an audience," I said. "Because I am not the story." "And the cake," a bridesmaid blurted, hand halfway to her mouth the way a girl reaches for a secret and then remembers not to. I didn't blink. "It's being sliced at the shelter on 3rd. The truth took the air out of the room, cleanly, decisively, like a window opening. For a second, the bride looked 12 years old and lost without a map. For a second, the boy I raised looked like a man no longer willing to trade his mother for a signature in a magazine. "We're not doing this today," Daniel said. "Not like this." "What does that even mean?" Eliza asked, voice cracking on the last word like thin ice. "It means I refuse to build a marriage on the idea that my mother's dignity is negotiable," he said. "It means if this day is more costume than vow, we walk away and try again when we remember why we wanted it." "Daniel," her father warned, but there wasn't much force in it. He'd just realized his influence had no jurisdiction where respect was the currency. Eliza glanced around as if the answer might be hanging from a chandelier. Then she looked at me, and the polish went out of her eyes. "I said something I can't unsay," she whispered. "I thought. That what you wear proves who you are," I finished for her. "It doesn't." A fragile quiet followed. A string player, still lingering near the door with his case, adjusted his grip. The maitre d' stood, crisp and ready to absorb whatever life threw next. Somewhere in the kitchen, a tray clinked as a server stacked clean glasses that would not be used. "We'll cancel," Daniel said. "Please let people know they can go home." The staff moved like a well-rehearsed bomb. Water appeared instead of champagne. Kindly explanations followed. The decorator eased garlands down as if tucking in a child. Guests flowed toward exits, the polite buzz transforming into a neighborly murmur, offers of rides, dignified retreat, the occasional glance back at the poor dumb luck of a day refusing to pretend. When only family remained, ours and hers, we pulled chairs around a side table meant for escort cards and lemon wedges. The room had gone back to ordinary size. The chandeliers stopped posing. Eliza's father spoke first. "Helena," he said, name heavy with a mixture of apology and a self-audit, I regret all of it. We were proud of a picture and forgot the frame wasn't the house. It happens, I said. You'll remember the next time you hang something important. He looked at Daniel. You're a good man. I learned by watching one, my son said, and grief moved through me the way wind moves through grass, invisible, total. Eliza dabbed at her eyes, not to protect makeup, but because vision was returning. What now? She asked. Is there a path where I can fix the worst of this? Not just with words, but with choices. We start by leaving this room, I said. And then we replace spectacle with substance. What does that look like? She asked. A smaller table, I said. A different kind of feast. She nodded. And your forgiveness? Is not an accessory, I said. It belongs to the outfit called humility. I'll recognize it when you wear it more than once. A choked laugh escaped her, relief and shame, and something like gratitude. I can. We left the venue by the service exit while a few last guests traded their surprise for compassion. Outside, the air smelled like wisteria and peeled tape. I drove to 3rd Street alone to greet the last act of my rebellion. The volunteer at the shelter looked at the cake as if it had fallen from a star. Big day? He asked, lifting the lid. A good one, I said. He didn't ask. He didn't need a story to do kindness well. We'll make sure everyone gets a slice. Especially the ones who think they don't deserve sweetness, I said. He smiled. That's most of us. When I turned back toward my car, a girl with a backpack too large for her frame looked up from the steps and stared at the frosting roses with a sort of holy concentration. She wasn't a guest at any wedding, but she treated it like a church. I hoped she took 2 pieces. I got home just before dusk. My small house greeted me with basil on the sill and sensible lamps. I made tea the way I always do, with the patience built into kettles, and sat on the porch while the day laid itself down. I expected exhaustion. What arrived was clarity. Sometimes the most extravagant thing you can do is stop feeding a hungry ghost of an idea. That day, I'd starved one. My phone chimed. A message from Daniel. We're at your place in 15? I set out 3 mugs. They came together, not touching but not apart. Eliza stood on my step and didn't ask to be invited in. She looked at me as if my face was the sign that told her which way the road turned. I'm sorry, she said. Without lace. Without audience. I was careless with what isn't mine. Your son. Your day. Your name. You were careless with your own, too, I said gently. I'd like to help you take it back. We sat at my kitchen table, the one that had held birthday candles, unpaid bills, grocery lists, poems Daniel wrote at 9, a robin's nest once found and examined and returned, casseroles signed by widows. The table was not pretty. It was steady, which is what beauty wants to be when it grows up. Tell me what you love about my son that isn't a thing anyone else can see on a photograph, I said. Eliza didn't blink. He organizes the spice drawer by what he cooks most, not alphabetically, so whoever is making dinner can find what they need by instinct. He sings badly on purpose to make me laugh when I'm anxious. He knows which sound means I'm about to apologize for breathing and says don't before I do. He remembers my grandmother's dog's name. He eats the heel of the bread because I don't like it. I felt my chest loosen. Good. And what do you love about yourself that a dress can't hold? She frowned, not self-conscious, just honest. I'm learning to notice when I'm performing. I'm good at names and bad at grudges. I can make a guest feel like a friend in 10 minutes. I don't abandon people when they're messy, but I do when I'm afraid someone important is watching. And I've decided I don't want to be that version of me anymore. That's the admission fee, I said. You're inside. Daniel reached for her hand then, and it was the first time since the ballroom that their palms met without announcing their intention to the world. He looked at me. The boy who once held my index finger to steady his first steps now asked permission to become the only person who gets to steady hers. What do you suggest? He asked. A reset, I said. A wedding that doesn't need chandeliers to shine. We keep our promise to celebrate, but we make the loudest thing the ocean. The beach, Eliza said, voice lighter for the first time in hours. The public one, I said. Where the wind ruins hairdos equally, and gulls don't care about last names. She smiled, surprised at herself for seeming relieved. And the budget? All the remaining money goes toward your life, not your pictures, I said. A down payment on a house that will fit the 2 of you and a pair of shoes by the door. An emergency fund that keeps fear out of the pantry. Journeys you make because you want to learn something, not because someone else needs to see you went. Eliza's eyes filled. I don't deserve that after today. No one deserves anything after a single day, I said. We build and we repair. That's the work. Take the offer or don't, but don't waste time auditioning for forgiveness. Wear it by changing. She nodded, the small nod of someone readying a shoelace for another mile. We set a date that evening, not a precise day on the calendar yet, just a shape, a late afternoon when the light turns amber and the water earns its name again. We decided who should be there, the ones who would have moved chairs without being asked and who would have eaten cake out of paper napkins without complaint. We called 3 people before bed. None of them asked what we'd wear. The next days were a different kind of busy. Not the frantic hummingbird of vendors and confirmations, but the steady antmiler of lists with practical verbs: borrow, pack, call, bring, bake. I asked Martin, the maitre d' who had handled the unraveling with dignity, if he would like to moonlight on his day off. He said yes, with a smile you keep for good secrets. He had a cousin with a dock and a stack of weathered planks. He promised a table long enough to matter and low enough to let the sea do the speaking. Eliza spent a morning with her grandmother learning to braid rosemary into twine. For the napkins, she said over the phone, her voice full of something plainer and much more solid than excitement. Also, I'm returning the rental tiara. Keep a hairpin, I said. You'll need it in the wind. Daniel came by in the evenings to fix things he could have ignored a month ago: the loose hinge that sighed on the pantry door, the porch board that tilted, the faucet that needed a new washer. He fixed them for me, but also for himself, to remind his hands they were for building more than applause. The calls came, as calls do, from people who had been at the venue or had heard from someone who knew someone. Some were kind and quiet. Are you all right? How can we help? Some were not. Is it true? Did she really? I answered the kind ones. The others learned silence from me by example. At the shelter, a volunteer sent a photo of the cake on paper plates, the frosting blushing at the edges where room temperature made it honest. A boy with a gap-toothed grin had 2 candles stuck into his slice. Someone had scrounged them, someone else had lit them. The boy looked like no one had ever asked him what he wanted to wish for and meant it. I saved the photo. Not for online. For my refrigerator, which keeps better records. Eliza and I went shopping for nothing in particular, which is the best way to find the right thing. In a small shop that sold linen and patience, she tried on a dress the color of ocean foam and shook her head. Pretty, she said, but it doesn't feel like me. What feels like you? I asked. She thought. Something that lets me breathe. We walked out without a bag. It felt like a win. Night before the second wedding, I stood on my porch with that old cardigan over my shoulders and the tie clip cool against my collarbone. I talked to my husband the way I always do when I want his spine and my words. You would have hated the ballroom. I told the dark and loved the beach. A car passed. A neighbor's dog barked once. The basil offered up the ghost of summer when I brushed it with my sleeve. If grief can be satisfied, mine was that night. Not full, never full, but dignified enough to sit with guests. Morning came simple. I boiled eggs, packed salt in a film canister the way my mother did, tucked a small knife into a dish towel, filled a thermos with coffee and another with hot water for tea. Eliza texted a photo of her shoes, sandals, nothing precious. Daniel sent a picture of the sky over the path, a blue that looked like forgiveness and possibility, had decided to share the same blanket. We met at the trailhead, not as a production but as neighbors and family and people who had learned the difference between being seen and being witnessed. Martin arrived with the borrowed planks and 2 sawhorses, and the kind of competence that makes everyone around him inhale like they've been holding their breath. He set the table so it looked like it had chosen to be there. You've done this before, I said. I've fed fishermen on break, he said. They'll teach you what matters at a table. The wind was up, the gulls lawless. The officiant carried his license folded into a paperback novel. Eliza came down the path not like a procession, but like a person who knows where she's going and wants to arrive in time to enjoy it. Daniel watched her the way you watch rain you've needed. When their hands found each other, no one told them where to stand for the camera. The sea did the lighting. The vows were not rehearsed. They were not clipped from a post. They felt like two people promising to put chairs away and take fevers at 2 a.m. and admit when they were afraid and remember what they had just almost lost. When the officiant said the words "everyone waits for," a gull squawked and someone's napkin escaped, and we all laughed, and it was perfect because it was alive. We ate what we brought, and what others brought, and what the wind didn't steal. Someone spilled olive oil, and it turned the linen darker in a shy oval that I knew would dry and leave a map behind. Eliza's father sat across from me and offered me the first of anything that came by, as if a man could tuck a debt into a small kindness and watch it soften. He didn't talk about clubs or boards or magazine spreads. He pointed to the horizon and said, "I hadn't noticed how much work the seed is just to keep its own promise." "That's the trick," I said. "Promise small. Keep all of it." He nodded. He looked at his daughter like a man who had met her for the first time and liked her without consulting anyone. As the light shifted from bright to honey, as the wind learned our names, as the gulls declared their opinions and were ignored with love, I watched Eliza take off her sandals and curl her toes into the cool sand. She looked over at me as if I had taught the tide to return. I had not. I had only remembered that it would and cleared a space for it. "Thank you," she mouthed. "You're welcome," I mouthed back, because grudges are heavy and I am old enough to prefer breathing. When the first star arrived to see what all the noise was about, someone lit a small fire and we stood around it like every story we come from. I told only one, the short version for nights when children with marshmallows were listening. "Once upon a time," I said, "a girl mistook the picture for the promise. Then she remembered the promise and the picture took itself." "That's not how stories end," a small boy said from somewhere near the Morays. "It is when the people in them decide to keep living," I said. We packed quietly, the kind of quiet that means contentment, not absence. People carried more than they brought. The table left no trace, but flattened grass and a memory of laughter that would keep the dunes company. On the walk back up the path, Daniel and Eliza hung behind. I kept my pace with Martin and his sawhorses. He whistled softly, a tune without a name. At the parking lot, people hugged without declaring it a ceremony. No one shouted, "Best day ever." It wasn't. It was only the right one. At home, I took off my cardigan and folded it over the back of a chair. The tie clip gleamed with a memory that hurt exactly the way love should, enough to keep you honest and on your feet. I washed the dishes I had used that morning and let them air dry. In bed, I thought of a boy in a shelter blowing out 2 candles over a stranger's cake and of a bride who had learned that remorse tastes better when it's followed by repair. The next week, we started looking at houses. Not mansions. Places with sinks that had opinions and floorboards that remembered other feet. We scheduled one viewing at a time, which is how you do anything you want to last. At the second house on the 3rd day, Eliza stood in a small kitchen with painted cabinets and pressed her palms flat against the countertop. "This is where we'll slice cake for birthdays," she said. "Even the small ones. Especially the small ones." I nodded. The window over the sink faced east. Mornings would be kind there. We made an offer that afternoon. I used the account I had kept for their beginning, not to buy a ballroom for an audience, but to buy a threshold for a family. Papers were signed. Keys changed hands. We didn't bring a photographer. We brought a broom. On the first night in the new house, I stopped by with soup and a plant that will not die unless ignored. Eliza met me at the door in socks, hair pinned up with the kind of clip you choose for utility. There were boxes everywhere and a blanket on the floor where a bed will be. She looked proud of the chaos. "Do you want to see something?" she asked. She led me to the small dining room where a single lamp turned wood into caramel. On the wall, already hung, was a frame. Inside it, a slip of paper handwritten in Eliza's neat print. "At our table, we speak to the person, not the outfit. We leave our pride on the porch. We pour for others before we refill our own glass. We take pictures only after we've lived the moment. We keep a slice for anyone who missed the party." I reached out and touched the glass. "It'll get fingerprints," I said. "Good," she said. "Proof we were here." Daniel came in with a box labeled books and set it down with a grunt. He looked at the list and then at me and then at his wife. The look in his eyes was the sentence every mother waits to see written on her child's face. I chose well. We ate soup on the floor and used moving blankets as napkins. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The house listened. Houses do, if you give them something worth keeping. Later, alone, I drove past the hillside venue where this had almost gone another way. Light bloomed behind tall windows. Someone else's quartet lifted their bows. New vows were being tried on for size under chandeliers that made promises of their own. I smiled and wished them ordinary days. When I reached home, I set my purse on the counter and the cardigan over the chair and my hand on the tie clip. The sea air had left a faint salt on the metal. I did not polish it off. I left it, a quiet reminder that some of the best things arrive when something else has been dissolved. Tomorrow we'll take them to choose paint, I thought. Something clean on the walls. Something that holds light. And somewhere on 3rd Street, perhaps, a volunteer will save the last 2 pieces of cake for a stranger who arrives late and apologizes as if hunger ever needed an excuse. We will save them a slice at our table, too. I watched the same woman who called me a poor outcast knot rosemary around napkins with bare, salt-stung hands and whisper, "I want to do this right." We married them by the sea, and the waves clapped where the guests had been. We did not wait for a new dress code or a new headline. We chose a day when the tide would be low at 4 and the wind would behave like a kindly aunt. 13 invitations went out as phone calls, not envelopes. Come hungry, bring a sweater, leave your pride on the porch. Martin, gallant even off the clock, borrowed planks from his cousin's dock and made a table that looked like it had grown out of the dune grass on purpose. Eliza arrived first, early on purpose. She wore linen that didn't mind the wind and carried twine and rosemary she'd braided with her grandmother that morning. No bridal party. No choreographer. She stood in front of me and didn't blink. "You were right," she said. "I called the picture a promise. I won't make that mistake again." "Then not those napkins tight," I said, handing her the bundle. "Promises like to loosen in the breeze." We set the table to the metronome of waves. Lemons in a bowl. For loaves of bread. A little tin of salt that used to hold film, because some habits are too sensible to replace. People arrived as themselves, the best friend from the house painting summer, my sister who cries when she's happy, Eliza's grandmother who still cans peaches in July, the officiant with a paperback containing his license. Shoes optional. Watches unnecessary. Daniel came down the path last, his face the exact look he wore the day he learned to ride a bike, steady and done with wobbling. He took his place, not at an altar framed by rented flowers, but in the hollow the wind had carved between 2 low dunes. When Eliza reached him, she slid her hand into his like you slip into a house you plan to stay in. The vows were short and specific. He promised to unclench first. She promised to notice when performance tried to put its hand on her back and steer. They both promised to count people by their kindness, not their polish. When the officiant pronounced them married, a gull objected with a single loud syllable and a napkin escaped, both excellent omens. After, I did not toast. I gave them what a mother owes grown children, a boundary and a blessing. Boundary, I said. At our table, no one speaks about a person's worth in the language of labels or photographs. If someone forgets, we correct them. If someone insists, we show them the gate. Blessing, I said. May your life be ordinary and good. May your money be quiet and your generosity loud. May your home be small enough to hear each other think and big enough to fit one more chair. We ate with our hands and laughed without worrying what our faces looked like from the side. Eliza's father, who had once measured afternoons by how often people said his name, peeled shrimp neatly and said very little. When he finally spoke, he stared at his bare feet pressing moon shapes into wet sand. "I've mistaken attention for value," he said. "I'm trying to stop." "Practice helps," I said. "So does a daughter who tells the truth." He glanced at Eliza, no pearls, no veil, and nodded with a softness I hadn't seen in him before. "She does." As the light went honey and the gulls approved of everything with rude commentary, Eliza stepped out of her sandals and buried her toes in the cool sand. She looked over at me and gave the small nod of a woman who intends to keep promises even on days without witnesses. "Thank you," she mouthed. You're welcome, I mouthed back, because grudges are heavy and I'm old enough to prefer breathing. When the first star came on like a tiny lamp in a far window, we lit a little fire and passed a dented pot of marshmallows. The smoke wasn't pretty. It went exactly where it wanted. We laughed and let it. The ocean wrote its quiet sentence and repeated it like prayer. I told the short version of the story for the children. Once, a girl mistook the frame for the portrait, then chose the picture that comes after people have lived. They accepted the moral after their second us more. That night, at home, I took the gray-blue cardigan from my shoulders and set it over a chair. The tie clip from my husband lay cool against my collarbone. The salt the wind had left on the metal felt like punctuation. Full stop, new line. We began the next chapter with errands instead of hashtags. Houses, not headlines. In a week, we stood in the kitchen of a narrow place with floors that remembered other feet. The window over the sink faced east. A grapevine bordered the little yard, as if offering to teach us how to grow on purpose. Eliza pressed both palms to the wooden counter and smiled without waiting for anyone to take her picture. This is where we'll slice cake for birthdays, she said. Even the small ones. We bought the house with money I had guarded like a candle on a windy night. Not for a ballroom. For a threshold. At closing, documents slid from one side of a wooden table to the other. Names became promises. Daniel signed, Eliza signed, and when it was my turn I added my steady hand, then slid the pen back and thought of every quarter my husband and I had saved on purpose all those decades ago. We didn't celebrate at a restaurant. We celebrated with broom and bucket. Eliza's grandmother blessed the threshold with a trio of useful gifts: bread so they'd never know hunger, salt so their days would have flavor, a candle so the dark would never own them. Daniel fixed the crooked cabinet hinge before the light changed. I tacked a little brass hook by the door for a cardigan. I dropped off Soup that first evening and found a frame already hanging on their dining room wall. Inside, in Eliza's tidy hand, were the rules for their table. We speak to the person, not the outfit. We leave our pride on the porch. We pour for others before refilling our own glass. We take pictures after we've lived the moment. We keep a slice for anyone who missed the party. It'll get fingerprints, I said, touching the glass. Good, she said. Proof we were here. The next day, a volunteer from the 3rd Street shelter texted a photo. The wedding cake, our cake, had made it onto paper plates with plastic forks. Someone had scrounged 2 candles for a boy in a red jacket. He stared at his slice like it was a door. He blew, and the smoke rose like a new thing trying its wings. I printed the photo and stuck it to my refrigerator with the magnet shaped like a basil leaf. It looked better there than it ever would have on the internet. It took a while for gossip to get bored. That's its nature. People asked gentle questions and ungentle ones. I answered the gentle. The others learned something from my silence. Not punishment, just a lack of fuel. Fires go out when you remove the wood. Eliza's father and I had our own quiet meeting because peace you can count on grows from conversations no one photographs. He came to my porch in shirt sleeves, no entourage, sat on the steps like a man visiting his sister after church. I owe you a debt I can't repay, he said. You owe me a daughter who uses her voice for good, I said. Keep paying that in installments. He smiled in the self-deprecating way of a man who knows debt from the inside. I can do that. We talked about ordinary philanthropy, not galas and glossy programs, but the kind where a landlord keeps a rent steady for a winter and a foundation pays for night classes without plastering logos on everything. I told him how I made my money, patient and unflashy, for laundries, then apartments, then a sale at a number I never said out loud in public because privacy is not poverty. He listened without trying to rename my choices. That was apology enough. Weeks later, on a Tuesday that smelled like cut grass and possibility, I found a note in my mailbox tucked beside a lemon and a sprig of rosemary. It was from Eliza. We don't have a chandelier, she wrote, but your rule about kindness makes the ceiling look higher. I took your cardigan and wore it to the grocery because I was cold. The cashier said, nice sweater. I said, thank you. Then I remembered the other thing. Kindness speaks first. I hope I never forget again. P.S. We saved you the heel of the bread because Daniel says you like it for dipping. I set the lemon on the counter and the rosemary in a glass of water and the note where my husband used to leave lists for me: milk, tea, patience. On their first real night in the house, I brought over a pie and stayed as long as was polite. We ate at a table that wobbled just enough to need a folded postcard under one leg. After dessert, Eliza and I washed dishes together while Daniel swept, and she told me a story. The morning after the beach, she called the boutique, apologized for the way she'd spoken to their seamstress when she'd been shopping weeks before, and thanked the woman for her patience. How did she take it? I asked. She said, "We all have our days," Eliza said. Then she told me where to find clothespins that actually hold in the wind. Wisdom comes in bags of 20, I said. Used to. We laughed. The house listened. Good houses do. When the season turned and the air grew kind, we went back to the shore where the vows had heard themselves. We brought small things worth blessing: a sprig of basil for sauces to come, a tiny white shoe for a new life promised, but not yet announced, a gray-blue cardigan, because every story carries its own relic. The gulls attended, loud as ever. The water made its faithful music. No chorus, no violin, just the band we could never overpay: wind, wave, two hearts trying again. On the walk back, Eliza tucked her hand through my arm. "I used to think money meant you never have to apologize," she said. "Now I think it means you can fix things faster if you remember what matters." "You learned the expensive lesson without wasting a fortune," I said. "That's rare." We paused at the top of the path and looked back. The tide had cleaned our footprints with its usual efficiency. That was fine. Our table rolls were taped inside the pantry door and pricked into habit. Homeward, I drove past the hill where the canceled ballroom looks like a ship forever docked. Through tall windows I could see strangers promising familiar promises under crystal and draped light. I wish them boring Tuesdays and the good kind of tired. I wish them someone who will eat the heel of the bread. At my own kitchen table, I made a list in my late husband's careful style: Thursday soup, rosemary, call the shelter, mend the cardigan. Then, because not every miracle announces itself, I added one more line: save 2 slices. A month later, a young couple from our street missed dessert at a neighborhood potluck because their car wouldn't start. They arrived late, breathless, apologizing as if delays were moral failures. Eliza stood, disappeared into the kitchen, and returned with 2 perfect slices of a plain sheet cake she'd baked that morning. She slid the plates across the table with the confidence of a woman who knows how to fix a small hunger quickly. "We keep a slice for anyone who missed the party," she said. House rule. The couple laughed and cried and ate and stayed. When they left, the street felt closer together than any chandelier could have managed. That night, in the quiet after dishes, I pinned the tie clip to my cardigan and looked in the mirror long enough to recognize not a symbol, not a lesson, but a woman with lines from laughing and from living, a woman who forgot a dress and remembered a backbone. I touched the metal and gave thanks for economies learned at kitchen tables and fortunes that refused to brag. If you are waiting for a grand finale, it's small on purpose. The real ending is ordinary: a modest house where people arrive with casseroles and leave with borrowed Tupperware, a beach where vows can hear themselves, a shelter where cake slices find mouths that welcome them, a cardigan that still smells faintly of salt on damp days. A son who chose family over performance. A daughter-in-law who chose humility over applause. A grandmother who chose to be rich out loud only in the currency that grows when you spend it. The quartet never played for us again, but sometimes, when the kettle whistles and the wind threads itself through the basil by the window, I swear I hear a violin tuning in the next room. It's only the house settling. It's only the life we built, making its warm, unremarkable music. And that is enough.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!